You and I, we bumped into each other there a little while ago, and it's Cystic Fibrosis Month. And honestly, I was probably like a lot of the population. You hear about it, but until you actually talk to someone who's, either knows someone specifically or themselves that have had it, it's pretty darn enlightening. And you gave me a challenge there a little while back with that drinking straw. You want to explain what that's like?
Yes, sure. So for people who have cystic fibrosis, we have narrowed airways because there's so much mucus clogging our lungs, which makes it difficult to breathe. And because it's a progressive disease, your lungs slowly and slowly get scarred and worse over time. So those airways narrow even more. So to give sort of a hint of what it's like to breathe with lung disease, I challenge Mr. Getson to kind of do some moderate exercise, and then you take a straw, you plug your nose, and you just breathe through the straw for a good minute. It probably doesn't feel too bad at first, but as the minute wears on, I think it starts to hit home that it's not an easy thing to breathe like that. So.
No, it's not at all, and it brings it to relevance. I mean, when I was younger and very athletic, I was athletic, like most armchair quarterbacks. But there was that sense. But being middle-aged now, so to speak, and with now out as much exercise a person should, and then you compound that with a straw. Holy crow! Like it really got my attention. So on that side, and then the other one too, Amanda, and that maybe you can tell us a little bit about. I understand it's sometimes it's a hereditary disease, but it's a lifelong illness. Maybe you want to go through that a bit.
Yeah, that's right. So we're born with it. It's a genetic disease, which means you need one mutation from mom and one from dad. There are over 2,000 genetic mutations of CF, so it's a rare disease already, but then there's even more elements as you kind of dig into it, and that will come into play with the new treatments that come out over the next year, actually. So it's a fatal disease. There is no cure. So what that means is that from birth on, we are trying to keep our lungs as healthy as we can so we can live as long as we can. I was born in the 1980s, and then the life expectancy was in your teens. So I'm 38 now. So I've outlived that life expectancy, thankfully. And that's due to new symptom management drugs that have come onto the market over the last 30 years, really. So what we do is we have inhaled medications that we take through a nebulizer, which is like a puffer, but you breathe into it for a good 20, 25 minutes of just breathing in the medication. And then we have physio that we do to clear all the sticky mucus that sits in our lungs. So you can do that. It used to be, well, actually it still is for little babies and children, that you do percussive treatment. So parents will clap different areas of their children's lungs. And that can take 2 hours a day because you have to do a minimum of 2 hours when they're healthy and more when we're not. So it's a very time-intensive disease. And then as time goes on, it becomes even more time-intensive. So for myself, a few years ago, I was on permanent supplemental oxygen usage. I spent over 5 hours a day doing airway clearing treatments, and it was always a losing battle because the mucus filled my lungs faster than I could clear it. So, and it's exhausting because you use so many calories and so much energy just to breathe. And compounded on that is that we are not able to digest fats or nutrients well. So for everything we eat, we take medication to digest our food for us. So just to maintain a relatively healthy weight, I was eating 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day. And that's just to maintain so that you don't need a feeding tube to supplement, which is what quite a few people do end up having to have. Thankfully, because of a new medication called Trikafta, which we'll talk about in a little bit, I'm now at a very healthy body weight because of the way the medication works.
Well, and thank you for being so open with this again. And we want to do what we can and talk about it, bring awareness to it, obviously. And again, full admission, I wasn't fully appreciative of some of the challenges. Is cystic fibrosis pretty common, or is it still on the rare side? Or
it's definitely a rare disease. So there's about 4,400 Canadians with CF. When kids that are born today, their life expectancy, their median life expectancy is around 54 years, which that means that about half of those kids born today will live to be 54. that means that there's half that won't, and this disease severely impacts young adults, like into your 20s and 30s are typically pretty difficult years. And there are 600 in Alberta, actually. So it's not a huge number, but it's enough that people probably know of someone who has it, whether in passing or if you know them well, but yeah.
Well, maybe, so the good news story is, with Trikafta, you kind of brought that to our attention. And I'd seen a video clip there before. I'm not sure if you have that with us today.
I do, yeah.
Would you be able to share that? Just because again, it was eye-opening of the changes and where you were at in your path for recovery or treatment, as it were, and where you're at now. It kind of blew me away, quite frankly.
I will do that. So before I do, though, there's a couple generations of medication before Trikafta that do kind of the same thing, but don't help as many people with CF. So because I have access to very good group benefits plan, I was able to take one of the previous generation modulators that aren't covered publicly called Orkambi. That was about 5 years ago. And at that time, my health was on a steep decline, and it stabilized me long enough that I was still here in order to receive Trikafta. So Trikafta is not Health Canada approved yet, but because I was so sick, I was given compassionate access to it. So I'll just pull up that video now.
And you were almost at lung transplant stage or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So I was undergoing assessment for lung transplant, and that has changed since this. So I'll just play the video for a minute.
Okay, sure.
Cystic fibrosis. Struggling to breathe despite hours of daily treatments and a lot of time in the hospital. Until now. In 2020, I became sick enough to receive compassionate supply of Trikafta, and it started working within hours. Trikafta has given me the ability to take deep, clear breaths and hang up this oxygen tether for the first time in 3 years. Trikafta has allowed me to ride a bike again for the first time with our daughter, and given me hope of guiding her through her teenage years, high school graduation, and even beyond. Because of Trikafta, I can actively participate in my own life with my family rather than just watch from the sidelines. And my husband has a break from being primarily my caregiver and running our household by himself. I am immensely grateful to have received Trikafta, and every Canadian with CF deserves to feel hopeful like this without first hitting end-stage lung disease.
And that was literally a year ago.
Less than, yeah, actually tomorrow is my 1-year anniversary of starting Trikafta. So I recorded that video last fall in September. And since then I've had even more improvements to my health. As you mentioned, doing the lung transplant assessment, I completed all the tests for that, but we're not moving forward to the next steps to boards listing. So every year I have to have certain tests done to make sure that I'm still eligible to proceed with transplant when it's needed. And those have been waived for a year, so I don't even have to do those, which is excellent. The way that we measure how well our lungs are working, it's called a lung function test. So it measures the amount of air your lungs can take in and push out in a short amount of time. And those numbers have come up as well to numbers I haven't seen for at least 5 years. And I feel like I did a decade ago. And again, because it's a progressive disease, that's not supposed to happen. And with Trikafta, it does. So it's pretty amazing. And I also have not been in the hospital or needed IV antibiotics, which is a regular thing that we need to combat the bad bacteria that live in our lungs permanently. They're what causes the scarring and the damage over time. And eventually end up in the hospital very often having IV medications. So I have not needed those in over a year either. For the couple years before going on to Trikafta, and I had resisted this for quite a while, we get permanent or semi-permanent IV lines put into our arms that are quite long. And I really didn't want to go the route that you would put a permanent one in your chest where they could just immediate access when needed. But I did do that and I haven't had to use it. So it's such a huge blessing. It's made such a huge difference.
Well, and this is the second time I've seen your video and kind of that generation Cowboys Won't Cry, but wow, You know, having 4 kids of my own and just, you know, seeing with you picture your family, you have a beautiful family.
Thank you.
And tell me what that's like, having the change there and giving you time back with your husband and your daughter.
Oh, it's unbelievable. He used to look after everything in our house. I had help in the house with our daughter. We are part of a really close-knit community, and there'd be meals dropped off and house cleaning and babysitting offered all the time. A few summers ago, I had a student that would actually come twice a week, and she would just hang out with Abby because I was not able to do it. I needed naps every afternoon. The time to do my physio and that, I really felt like I was watching my life happen and not really participating in it. And now I can participate again. Yeah, things like helping set up our pool for the summer, all that kind of stuff. I can help with that again. I can look after my house. My husband doesn't have to worry about that anymore. He can focus on work and focus on having fun with us when I have the energy to do it. It's just great. It's life changing, and it's things like that you wouldn't think about, little tasks that you do, like emptying the dishwasher, folding the laundry, playing a game with your child, all that stuff. I would need breaks of good 10 or 15 minutes just coughing in order to move to the next one, or I would need a nap before I could do the next thing. And now I can do these things all day long. I can run errands, I can go to the park with Abby, I can, yeah, it's, and at the end of the day, you're tired, but it's a good tired. It's an accomplished tired, which is huge.
Well, that's wonderful. And it must be tons of strain off the family and everything too, just because of that. That's
100%. Yeah. So I was actually, my first application for this drug went in late 2019, and I was rejected the first time, which was hard to understand because I had been so sick that year. And at the same time, the US had approved Trikafta for everybody who was 12 and up. And you started to see these videos of people celebrating their difference in health. So as much as it's such a huge blessing for me to be able to share this story, it's very difficult because in Canada, not many people have it yet, only the very sickest. And if we only give it to the people who have such severe lung disease and don't give it to children before all that permanent damage happens, you're not going to see the benefits the same way that you would if you gave it to them. Like, they have a chance for a relatively normal life compared to what myself and other adults with CF have had to endure to this point. So it is a game-changing medication. And actually, as we open up from COVID and start having easing of restrictions and people get to go back to their normal life, that's not really how it will be for people with CF, because we often have symptoms that you would associate with COVID. Risk of pneumonia, risk of hospitalization from lung infections, and we're often hospitalized more often probably than the average person who would contract COVID, right? So the other part is the masking and the distancing. People with CF can't actually be close to each other because we carry bacteria in our lungs that can make another person with CF very, very sick and lead to premature death sometimes, really. So we have to be very careful. This whole masking and 6 feet apart and all that stuff, when we're together with other CFers, that's what we do. But we're not even allowed in the same room together, really, unless you're family members, and then you take the risk because they're your sibling, right? So what would be awesome and amazing is if everyone is sort of slowly getting back to normal and be able to socialize and stuff again, and have CFers have that same opportunity, because Trikafta is supposed to come out this June here in Canada. And if we could also have our more normal and healthier life back, that would be incredible.
Well, and you know, maybe let's walk through that on the drug approval process, if you don't mind, because I know it's federal jurisdiction and potential items, and then although something is, you know, approved and fast tracked, sometimes in the States we lag behind. Maybe you can walk us through that a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty complicated. We have, as Mr. Getson mentioned, the federal and then the provincial jurisdiction. So federal's like Health Canada, they approve it as being safe. And then there's a cost benefit analysis that's done. So those are both expected to be done at the end of June. And usually they'd be done one after the other, and it could take up to 1.5 years to get that all finished. but the health minister at the federal level recognized how important Trikafta was and gave it an aligned review, which means those things are being done together, and an expedited priority review, which means they're done in 6 months and not a year to a year and a half. So we're really hoping that once that gets done in June, it moves to the provincial level, and then all the provinces kind of work together to negotiate a price that they're good with in order to add it to a public plan. And then everybody will hopefully be able to get it. But there's no timeline set for that. And there's other drugs like Orkambi that I mentioned earlier, and another one called Kalydeco that have kind of been tied up in that process for quite a few years. Specifically Orkambi since last June, and Kalydeco has been Health Canada approved since 2012, I believe, or 2014. Alberta is one of the 3 provinces that does fund Kalydeco, which helps 6% of people with CF, to the extent that it is Health Canada approved. For everything that Health Canada has approved it for, Alberta funds and provides, which is amazing. So we're hoping that we can also be the leader on Trikafta, which is the drug that helps 90%. So the vast, vast majority of people with CF, similar to the way that Kalydeco has helped the few.
Well, you've already got me convinced on this one, and you know, Minister Shandro, I hate to say it, he gets painted as kind of the bad guy all the time, but working with his department and having access to him, I think you can agree with me. You've talked to him, their group as well. They're very responsive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've had meetings with the Alberta Health Ministry over the last year, and they have been very receptive to keeping the door open and keeping conversations going. And our hope is that as soon as it's Health Canada approved and lands in their lap, that the groundwork is already done to get it to patients as soon as possible. Yeah.
Well, you've got my support on it for sure.
Thank you.
You know, we mentioned to the rural caucus as well, much of my colleagues, they're on board. And again, with us, it's, you know, obviously the portion of the population that needs it is it's not vast, but it's critical. Yeah. And the fact that you can have such dramatic results in such a short time frame. And I'm with you. If we can derail this before a bunch of folks get too sick or have to go through, you know, heaven forbid, somebody else that has a chance that doesn't have to go through what you did at your stage, you know, we can give that many more years and productive years.
Absolutely. I do know of 3 families, actually, not all just from Alberta, excuse me, that are sadly actively planning to leave Canada if they can't get the drug that they need for their kids. And I mean, we'll do anything for our children, right?
Absolutely.
And the thing is we pride ourselves on being a country that has great healthcare. And it's really sad to think that there are people that want to leave here for Europe and the US and the UK, where they're funded publicly. A number of countries in those areas are funded publicly for this drug, and their kids are thriving on social media anecdotally. Like the symptoms are virtually gone for a lot of them. So yeah, we really, really are hoping that this happens quickly.
Well, you have my word that I'll push as much as I can from my end. Thank you so much.